The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom was everything a father's money could buy for his precious daughter's wedding. Crystal chandeliers, cascading flowers, and an 8-piece string ensemble playing as guests found their seats. My husband David beamed proudly from the front row, every inch the devoted father of the bride. Father of one of his brides anyway. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes, my sister Rachel whispered, squeezing my hand. Are you sure about this? I touched the envelope in my clutch, containing 12 years of bank statements, travel records, and 2 DNA tests that would shatter this perfect facade. He used my fertility clinic savings to pay for her private school tuition. Rachel's grip tightened. She remembered those years, me working extra shifts at the hospital while David claimed we needed to be financially responsible before starting a family, all while his other family enjoyed the fruits of my labor in their Connecticut mansion. Emily looks beautiful, a woman behind me whispered to her companion. David must have spent a fortune on that dress. He had $25,000 from our joint account transferred the same month he told me we couldn't afford fertility treatments. I traced every dollar, every lie, every moment he'd stolen from both his families. The mother of the bride did an amazing job planning everything, another guest commented. Which mother of the bride, I wondered. Catherine, his legal wife sitting proudly in the front row, or me, his other legal wife, who'd unknowingly funded this entire celebration? David stood to greet more guests, his $5,000 tuxedo another withdrawal from our supposed retirement fund. He hadn't seen me yet, hidden in the middle rows with Rachel, hadn't noticed the manila envelope I carried or the USB drive containing proof of his decade-long fraud. Remember when he said we couldn't afford a house down payment? I murmured to Rachel. That was the year he bought them the lake house in the Berkshires. My sister's face darkened. She'd been there through my years of working doubles, watching me sacrifice everything for a future that David was spending on another family. He's going to pay for this. Oh, he's already paid, I smiled slightly. He just doesn't know it yet. The wedding planner bustled past, directing the final arrangements. She'd been paid from my account too. David getting sloppy in recent years, convinced I was too busy working to notice the discrepancies. The bride's ready, someone announced, and the guests began settling into their seats. David took his place at the front, practicing his father of the bride smile. He perfected that smile over the years, along with all his other masks. Devoted husband, responsible financial planner, pillar of 2 separate communities. The string quartet began the wedding march. Emily appeared at the doorway, radiant in the designer gown my overtime hours had purchased. She was beautiful. I couldn't deny that. Another thing I couldn't deny, the striking resemblance she bore to the 3-year-old girl in Connecticut, the daughter David had with Catherine while telling me we needed to wait for the right time to start our family. Welcome everyone, the officiant began as Emily reached the altar. We're gathered here today to celebrate the union of Emily Christine Sanders and I let his words fade into background noise, remembering all the nights I'd worked emergency room shifts while David was away on business. All the birthdays and anniversaries spent alone because he had client meetings. All the dreams of motherhood postponed because we needed to be financially secure. David looked so proud, someone whispered. Such a devoted father. That was my cue. I stood quietly, manila envelope in hand. He certainly devoted a lot of resources to this wedding, I said, loud enough to carry, including the money he stole from his other family. The officiant faltered. David's head snapped around, his face draining of color as he finally saw me. Margaret? What are you doing at my husband's daughter's wedding? I stepped into the aisle. I thought it was time both families met, especially since we all helped pay for this lovely celebration. Margaret, please. David started toward me but froze when I pulled out the first document. This is interesting reading, I said, holding up a bank statement. The same month you said we couldn't afford IVF, you paid for Emily's semester abroad. Quite generous of my overtime pay to fund her European adventure. Catherine, elegant in her mother of the bride outfit, stood from her front row seat. David, who is this woman? His wife, I answered pleasantly. Well, one of them. Though I believe the legal term is victim of criminal fraud, according to the FBI agents who've been reviewing our finances. Emily had gone pale in her expensive dress, her bouquet trembling. Dad? What's she talking about? Nothing, sweetheart, David tried to regain control. This is just a misunderstanding. Like the misunderstanding of whose money paid for this wedding, I projected bank transfers onto the ballroom's screen, or the misunderstanding about where my inheritance went after my mother died. The guests were openly staring now, phones forgotten as they watched David's carefully constructed world implode. That money was invested, David started. Yes, invested in your other family, I interrupted. In private schools and summer homes and trust funds. Tell me, Catherine, did you ever wonder how a financial planner afforded your lifestyle on his salary? Catherine's perfectly made-up face had gone ashen. We have family money. You have my money, I corrected her. Every luxury vacation, every country club membership, every dollar in Emily's college fund. All courtesy of the wife you didn't know existed. This is ridiculous. David's best man stood up. I've known David for 20 years. Which 20 years? I asked pleasantly. The ones he spent with me in Boston? Or the ones he spent with them in Connecticut? Because he's been running this scam longer than Emily's been alive. Emily sank into her chair, her dream wedding dissolving around her. Mom. Catherine couldn't answer, staring at the financial records still projected on the screen. Years of transfers, all traced back to accounts in my name. Your father had a talent for timing, I told Emily. He always visited Catherine during my night shifts, attended your school events when I was working overtime to build our future, a future he was spending on his other family. There must be some mistake, Catherine whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. The only mistake, I pulled out more documents, was thinking I wouldn't notice. Did you really believe all those business trips were legitimate, Catherine? That a financial planner needed to travel every other week? David made one last attempt. Margaret, we can discuss this privately. Like how you privately discussed my fertility treatments with your lawyer? Claiming we couldn't afford children while Catherine was pregnant with your second daughter. The ballroom went deadly quiet. Catherine's hand flew to her throat. Second daughter. Charlotte, isn't it? I smiled sadly. 3 years old, same green eyes as her father. You must have wondered why he insisted on naming her after my grandmother. Emily stood shakily. I have a sister. Half-sister, I corrected. Though given that my money paid for both your upbringings, perhaps we could call you financial sisters. The wedding planner was frantically conferring with the hotel staff, perhaps realizing this wasn't the kind of drama they prepared for. David stood frozen between his two families, his perfect double life shattering in spectacular fashion. The FBI has some questions about tax fraud, I continued conversationally. Apparently, claiming dependents in 2 different states raises red flags, as does transferring stolen money across state lines. Stolen? Catherine's voice cracked. Every dollar he gave you came from my accounts, I confirmed. The houses, the cars, the vacations, all paid for with my inheritance and my salary. He's been stealing from one family to support the other for 12 years. 1 year later, I sat in my new office at Massachusetts General Hospital, reviewing the final divorce settlement. David had pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and was currently serving 8 years in federal prison. His web of financial deception had been even more extensive than I'd initially discovered. The house in Connecticut sold, my lawyer reported. Catherine signed over her claim once she saw the proof that it was purchased with your money. The proceeds will be split between the restitution fund and a trust for both girls. Emily and Charlotte, my husband's daughters who'd never known about each other. Emily had postponed her wedding indefinitely, using her tuition fund to finish college instead. She'd been sending me awkward but sincere thank you notes for unknowingly funding her education. Catherine's divorce was finalized last month, Rachel mentioned, sorting through updates. She's moved in with her sister and is starting over. Apparently, she's training to become a financial fraud investigator. Irony had a way of coming full circle. The woman who'd unknowingly benefited from my stolen money was now helping other victims protect their assets. We even had coffee once, sharing stories of David's elaborate deceptions. Charlotte started preschool, I said, touching a photo Emily had sent. The half-sisters together at the little girl's birthday party. Same school Emily attended, though this time it's being paid for legitimately. The FBI had traced every dollar David had stolen, revealing a pattern of theft stretching back to before either marriage. He'd been running variations of this scheme his entire career, using one family's resources to fund another's lifestyle. Your fertility clinic called, Rachel said softly. The frozen embryos. They want to know your decision. I looked at the calendar. 3 years since I'd last believed David's excuses about waiting for the right time. Now, at 41, I had different choices to make. Don't need them to research, I decided. Someone else's dreams of parenthood shouldn't be built on lies. My office wall held a new certification. I'd used part of the recovered money to complete my medical administration degree. No more extra shifts or overtime. I ran the ER department now, making my own financial decisions. Emily asked if you're coming to her new wedding. Rachel mentioned. Small ceremony, just family. She's paying for it herself this time. I smiled at the invitation on my desk. Emily had emerged stronger from the scandal, more grounded. She even started a support group for children of fraudulent marriages, turning her pain into purpose. Charlotte calls her big sister now, Rachel continued. Catherine says it's the only good thing that came from David's lies, giving her daughter a sibling. The marriage licenses hung side by side in the FBI's case file. 2 wives, 2 families, 1 elaborate fraud. But while David had stolen our money, he couldn't steal our resilience. The restitution payments are set up, my lawyer noted. Both families will receive monthly deposits to rebuild their savings. Though you're entitled to the larger share. Split it equally, I interrupted. The girls shouldn't pay for their father's crimes. Let them build their futures on truth instead of theft. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine, another photo of the girls together. Charlotte wearing Emily's old ballet costume. They were building their own kind of family, one David had never intended but couldn't prevent. The FBI's using David's case to train agents, Rachel mentioned. Apparently, his double-life scheme was uniquely sophisticated. They're calling it the 2-state solution in their fraud manual. I looked at my new office, my new life, built on the ashes of David's deception. He'd stolen 12 years of my dreams, but he failed to steal my strength. His parole hearing is in 6 years, my lawyer reminded me. By then, I smiled, watching the ER team I now led handle another trauma case. Both his daughters will be college graduates, building lives based on their own work, not stolen opportunities. That's a better legacy than any lie he could have maintained. The sun set over Boston, painting the hospital windows in shades of truth. Sometimes the greatest frauds gave birth to the strongest healing, for victims, for families, for the future itself. The Fairmont Copley Plaza's Grand Ballroom was a sea of designer gowns and self-congratulation as Boston's elite gathered to celebrate Victoria Hamilton's retirement from the Hamilton Children's Hope Foundation. 10 years of allegedly selfless dedication to underprivileged youth, funded by what the society papers called her mysterious benefactor. Mysterious indeed. Darling, my husband James adjusted his bow tie, a nervous habit he developed since I showed him the evidence last week. Are you sure about this? Maybe we could handle it privately. Like how your mother privately handled my parents' deaths? I smiled, watching Victoria work the room in her custom Oscar de la Renta. Or how she privately transferred their foundation's assets while I was still in grief counseling. James flinched. He'd been as much a victim of his mother's manipulation as I had, signing papers he hadn't read while drowning in the aftermath of the accident that took both my parents. Victoria had swooped in, all maternal concern and promises to handle the difficult details. The difficult details being my parents' $30 million charitable trust. Caroline. Victoria air kissed my cheeks, her diamond bracelet catching the light. I wasn't sure you'd come. You've been so occupied lately. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, touching the USB drive in my clutch. After all, this foundation means as much to me as it does to you. Maybe more. Her perfectly Botox forehead tried to furrow. More? Whatever do you mean? Before I could answer, the evening's MC took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the children from Street Martin's home, here to perform in honor of their beloved benefactor. 8 children filed onto the stage, wearing new clothes that probably cost more than their families made in a month. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, the picture of philanthropic emotion. Aren't they precious? She whispered to her society friends. This is why we do this work. Is it? I asked, just loud enough to carry. Is that why you falsified transfer documents while my husband was sedated after identifying his in-laws' bodies? Victoria's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. I don't know what you're, or why you closed my parents' free medical clinic in Dorchester to fund your charity galas. The clinic that served 300 families. James stepped closer, finally finding his voice. Mother, what is she talking about? Nothing, darling. Caroline is obviously still struggling with her loss. The loss you exploited. I pulled out my tablet, displaying the original trust documents. My parents spent 20 years building their foundation, 20 years of actual work in communities that needed help, not photo ops and charity balls. The children on stage had finished their song, but no one was applauding. Victoria's inner circle had gone quiet, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Those documents are private, Victoria started. They were private, I agreed. Until your mysterious benefactor status made the FBI curious. Funny how many wealthy donors wanted to know who was really behind the Hamilton Foundation's sudden success. Victoria's society smile cracked slightly. Whatever you think you've discovered. I discovered everything, I cut her off. Every forged signature, every manipulated transfer, every dollar you stole while pretending to comfort your grieving son and daughter-in-law. The ballroom had grown unnaturally quiet. Even the string quartet had stopped playing, sensing the tension building at the main table. I have no idea what she's talking about, Victoria announced to her watching friends. Grief can make people imagine terrible things. Like imagining my mother's signature on transfer documents dated 3 days after her death. I projected the documents onto the ballroom's main screen. Documents you had James sign while he was on prescription sedatives. James stared at the screen, recognition dawning. Those papers, you said they were just insurance forms. She said a lot of things, I agreed. Like how my parents' foundation was too much responsibility for me in my grief. How she'd take care of everything. And she did take care of everything, right into her own charity's accounts. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand shook as she set down her champagne. These accusations are absurd. I've spent 10 years helping children. Using stolen money, I finished. Money that was meant for the medical clinic, the scholarship program, the community outreach my parents and their lives building. Tell me, Victoria, how many gowns like that one could have funded a year of insulin for the clinic's diabetic patients? Now see here. Victoria's husband George stood, his CEO authority failing to mask his panic. This is hardly the time or place. Actually, it's exactly the time and place. I gestured toward the back of the ballroom where people were entering. Because these are the real beneficiaries of my parents' legacy. Through the doors came faces Victoria had never wanted to see at her galas. Former patients from the shuttered clinic, students who'd lost their scholarships when the trust was drained, community workers dismissed when Victoria redirected the foundation's focus to more photogenic causes. Mrs. Chen. Victoria's voice cracked as she recognized her former housekeeper. What are you doing here? Telling the truth, Mrs. Chen replied, stepping forward. About how your children's foundation closed the free clinic where my grandson got his cancer treatments. About how you fired me when I asked why the clinic's funding disappeared. More people stepped forward, each with their own story. Scholarship students who had to drop out of college, single mothers who lost childcare support, elderly patients left without medication after the clinic's pharmacy program ended. These allegations are baseless, George blustered. We have documentation. Falsified documentation. I corrected, switching the projection to show financial records. My parents' foundation served over 3,000 families annually. The Hamilton Foundation. Despite claiming triple the budget, you've helped fewer than 200 people in 10 years, mostly with symbolic gestures at publicity events. James stood transfixed as the evidence mounted. The summer house in Newport, the new yacht. Mother, where did the money really come from? We were protecting you, Victoria insisted. Both of you were in no condition to manage such responsibility after the accident. So you managed it right into your own accounts. I pulled up more documents, like the $2 million transferred to your personal foundation the same day you had James sign those insurance papers, or the trust assets you used as collateral for your country club membership. The socialites who'd spent years applauding Victoria's generosity were now backing away, their phones undoubtedly already calling their lawyers to distance themselves from the scandal. The children, Victoria gestured desperately at the kids from Street Martins, still standing awkwardly on stage. Think about the children we've helped. Let's think about them, I agreed, nodding to a woman in the back. Ms. Rodriguez? Would you like to tell everyone about the real Street Martins home? The former administrator stepped forward. Street Martins served over 100 children before Mrs. Hamilton's foundation took over. Now it houses 8 children, the most photogenic ones, chosen for events like this. The rest were transferred to state facilities. Victoria's perfect mask finally cracked. "You have no right." "I have every right." I cut her off. "Those were my parents' life's work you stole. Their legacy you twisted into this performance of charity." James had gone pale, remembering. "The papers. I was on so many medications after the accident. Mother, how could you?" "We did it for you," George insisted. "Your position in society demanded certain appearances. Appearances paid for with stolen money." I projected the final document. The FBI's forensic accounting team was very thorough. "Would you like to see where every dollar of my parents' trust actually went?" Victoria lunged for her purse, but security guards were already moving in, not the hotel's security, but federal agents who'd been waiting for this moment. Victoria Hamilton, the lead agent, stepped forward. "We have some questions about the transfer of charitable assets and tax fraud." "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "I'm being awarded Humanitarian of the Decade." "Not anymore." I nodded to the event organizer, who was already removing Victoria's name from the evening's program. "But don't worry, my parents' restored foundation will put the award money to better use. Actually helping people, not just posing with them for photos." 1 year later, I stood in the newly reopened Thomas and Mary Sullivan Medical Clinic, watching as my parents' portrait was rehung in the lobby. The bright, modern facility was a far cry from the empty building Victoria had left to decay while hosting champagne fundraisers. "Mrs. Sullivan Hamilton." Dr. Patel, the clinic's returning head physician, approached with a tablet. "The diabetes management program is back to full capacity. We've already reconnected with 70% of our former patients." James, standing beside me, squeezed my hand. He'd spent the past year helping rebuild everything his mother had destroyed, working alongside the community members Victoria had deemed not our kind of people. "The Scholarship Foundation is ready for the new term," my assistant added. 45 students, full rides, including Mrs. Chen's grandson. He's starting medical school in the fall. Victoria had pled guilty to reduced charges, accepting a 5-year sentence served in a minimum security facility. George had resigned from his CEO position, their social circle evaporating as quickly as their illicitly gained status. "The new Street Martins home opens next month," James said quietly. "All 120 beds. No more picking kids for their photo potential. The home would operate as my parents originally intended, providing real support and education, not just staging opportunities for wealthy donors to feel charitable." Victoria's designer furniture had been sold to fund job training programs. The FBI finished their final audit, my lawyer reported. They've traced most of the diverted funds. The Hamiltons' assets will be liquidated to restore the original trust amounts. Victoria's society friends had scrambled to return their donations once the fraud was exposed. Amazing how quickly charity could be undone when it might implicate donors in financial crimes. "The Community Outreach Center is at capacity," Dr. Patel continued. "The mental health services your mother designed are making a real difference. She would have loved seeing it working as she planned." I touched my mother's face in the portrait. She and my father had built their foundation from nothing, working late nights and weekends to serve their community. How would they feel knowing their work lived on, stronger after surviving Victoria's attempt to corrupt it? "The Hamilton Children's Hope Foundation is being formally dissolved," my assistant noted. "The press wants to know if you'll comment on the irony of Victoria receiving fan mail from prison asking for charitable donations." "Tell them the only statement we're making is in our work," I replied, watching as patients filled the waiting room. Real people getting real help, not props for society photos. James had sold his family's Newport mansion, using the proceeds to fund the clinic's expansion. His mother's betrayal had opened his eyes to the hollow nature of the society she'd sacrificed everything to impress. "Your parents' original board members are meeting next week," my assistant added. "They're excited about restoring the International Medical Training Program." The program Victoria had canceled because it didn't photograph well would now train doctors from underserved communities worldwide. My parents' vision was expanding beyond even their original dreams. A young mother walked past with her child, heading to the pediatric wing that now bore my parents' names, not as a vanity gesture, but as a promise to uphold their values. Sometimes, James said softly. I wonder how many lives were harmed while we were too blind to see what she was doing. We can't change that, I said, touching the clinic's new mission statement engraved where Victoria's self-congratulatory plaque had once hung. But we can honor the legacy she tried to steal, not with galas and photo ops, but with actual service. The clinic hummed with purpose, doctors, patients, and staff working together in the way my parents had envisioned. Their foundation hadn't just survived Victoria's attempt to corrupt it, it had emerged stronger, its mission clearer for having been tested. Your mother's prison sentence ends in 4 years, my lawyer reminded me. Would you like me to prepare restraining orders? I looked around at my parents' true legacy, not the society parties and fake philanthropy Victoria had created, but the real work of helping others. No need, I smiled. The best revenge isn't punishment, it's restoration. I'm sorry, but this is a family event, Margaret Lancaster said, her designer suit and perfectly coiffed hair radiating smug authority as she blocked the church entrance. And you're simply not family. Behind her, guests in expensive attire filed past, throwing curious glances at our confrontation. My husband James stood frozen between us, caught between his controlling mother and his wife of 5 years. Mother, this is ridiculous, James started. Sarah is my wife. And this is your sister's wedding, Margaret cut him off. I won't have it disrupted by unnecessary additions to the guest list. Unnecessary, that's what she called me at every family event for the past 5 years. The unnecessary wife her precious son had married against her wishes. The unnecessary genetic counselor who hadn't come from the right social circle. The unnecessary witness to what I discovered in the couple's genetic screening results. Mrs. Lancaster, I kept my voice steady. As the hospital's chief genetic counselor, I really need to speak with Jessica and Michael before. Before nothing, she snapped. I won't have you inventing some medical drama to ruin my daughter's perfect day. The pre-marriage screening was completed weeks ago. Yes, it was. And that's exactly why I was here. James, his mother turned to him. Surely you understand this is a private family celebration. Perhaps Sarah could wait at home. Home, where I'd spent the last 3 nights staring at test results that would shatter this perfect wedding. Results showing that the happy couple share far more than wedding vows. They shared DNA. Actually, I pulled an envelope from my bag. This concerns Michael's adoption records. Margaret moved faster than I'd ever seen her, manicured hands snatching the envelope. How dare you? Michael's adoption is sealed. His past is none of your business. But it was her past. The baby boy she'd given up 30 years ago during her first marriage. The son she'd never told her current family about. The child who'd grown up to fall in love with his own sister. The genetic screening showed some concerning markers. I tried again. As their counselor, I'm legally obligated. You're legally nothing to this family, Margaret hissed. James, control your wife. James looked torn, years of maternal manipulation warring with his instincts. Sarah wouldn't be here without a reason, Mother. Her reason is obvious, to embarrass us, like she always does. Margaret's perfect mask slipped slightly. She's jealous of Jessica's happiness, trying to ruin her special day with more of her common drama. Through the church doors, I could see Jessica in her wedding gown, radiant as she prepared to marry the man who was unknowingly her brother. Michael stood at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, showing the same aristocratic features as his biological mother who was now blocking my path. Mrs. Lancaster, I lowered my voice. There are serious medical implications. The only serious implication, she stepped closer, is what will happen to your marriage if you don't leave immediately. James understands the importance of family loyalty, don't you, darling? I watched my husband struggle, years of conditioning visible in his hesitation. But this time, I couldn't back down. Not with what I knew. The ceremony starts in 10 minutes, Margaret smiled triumphantly. James, escort your wife home. She's clearly not feeling well. Not feeling well? I laughed softly. No, I'm feeling perfectly clear-headed. Clear enough to recognize your features in Michael's face. The same features Jessica has. Clear enough to understand why their genetic screening showed markers that should be impossible unless they share a parent. Margaret's perfectly controlled facade cracked, just slightly. You're delusional. DNA doesn't lie, I said quietly. But you did. To your family, to your children, And now you're about to let them commit. James, Margaret's voice rose sharply. Remove your wife from these premises immediately. But James was staring at Michael through the church doors, really looking at him perhaps for the first time. Mother, he does look like Jessica. This is absurd. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her already perfect jacket. Michael's adoption records are sealed. You couldn't possibly. Genetic counselors have access to medical databases for exactly these situations. I pulled out another envelope. When the initial screening showed concerning markers, I was legally required to investigate. Did you think changing his birth date would be enough to hide it? Through the church doors, the wedding planner was starting to line up the bridal party. Jessica's bridesmaids, all wearing the exact shade of blue Margaret had insisted upon, gathered around the bride. None of them knew they were about to witness something very different from a wedding. Whatever you think you know, Margaret's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. Consider very carefully what accusations like this will do to your marriage. I've considered everything. I met her gaze steadily, including what will happen if they marry, have children, and those children suffer the genetic consequences of consanguinity. How long did you think you could keep this secret? James moved closer, his face pale. Mother, what is she talking about? Nothing, darling. Your wife is simply trying to cause trouble, as usual. Like I caused trouble when I questioned those investment opportunities you push on James' clients? I asked quietly. The ones that mysteriously collapse after you withdrew your own money. Margaret's perfect mask slipped further. She'd never forgiven me for protecting James's financial planning clients from her schemes. She'd spent years trying to convince him I was destroying family unity by questioning her business practices. This is different, she hissed. This is my daughter's wedding. To her brother. I finished. Your son. Born March 15th, 1993, at St. Mary's Hospital. Given up for adoption through Catholic Charities. Ring any bells? The color drained from Margaret's face. How did you? DNA doesn't lie, I repeated. And genetic markers don't care about sealed records. When a screening showed impossible similarities, I ran additional tests. Would you like to see the results? They're quite conclusive. Inside the church, the wedding coordinator was giving final instructions to the bridal party. In 5 minutes, they would start the processional. In 5 minutes, Jessica would walk down the aisle toward her own brother. James, Margaret turned desperately to her son. You can't believe these ridiculous accusations. Your wife is trying to destroy our family. By preventing genetic catastrophe, I interrupted. By stopping a brother and sister from unknowingly committing incest. Yes, how destructive of me. James was staring at his mother, really seeing her perhaps for the first time. The timing, this would have been during your first marriage, before you met Dad. Ancient history, Margaret waved dismissively, but her perfect confidence was cracking, and completely irrelevant to today's celebration. Relevant to the bride and groom sharing 50% of their DNA, I pulled out the test results. Relevant to any children they might have. Relevant to the fact that you've known this whole time and said nothing. The wedding march began to play softly, a practice run for the ceremony. Through the doors, I could see Jessica beaming as she prepared to marry the man she didn't know was her brother. Think very carefully, Margaret's voice shook slightly, about what these accusations will do to this family. I have thought about it. I met her gaze. I thought about Jessica and Michael's right to know the truth, about the children they might have, about the fact that you're willing to let them commit incest to protect your secret. James took the test results from my hand, his face growing paler as he read. Mother, is this true? Of course not, but her denial lacked conviction. Your wife clearly fabricated. Like I fabricated the investment fraud evidence, I asked quietly. The documentation you couldn't explain away. Tell me, Margaret, how many secrets are you willing to sacrifice your children to keep? The wedding coordinator appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Lancaster, we're ready to begin. Margaret straightened her spine, years of social training taking over. Wonderful. My daughter's wedding will proceed exactly as planned. No, James's voice was firm. It won't. James, darling. Either you tell them, he said quietly, or we will. 1 year later, I sat in my office reviewing genetic screening files, a photo of Jessica and Michael on my desk. Not as bride and groom, but as the brother and sister they discovered themselves to be that day at the church. The support group is helping, James said from the doorway, bringing coffee. Jessica says knowing the truth was better than living a lie, even if the truth hurt. The siblings had spent the past year rebuilding their relationship on honest ground. The romantic love had transformed into family bonds, stronger perhaps for having survived Margaret's deception. Michael found his birth father. I touched the latest update. A professor in Vermont. They're meeting next week. Turns out he never knew about the pregnancy. Margaret's web of lies had unraveled spectacularly after the wedding that wasn't it. Her first husband had been devastated to learn of the son she'd hidden from him. The adopted parents had been horrified to discover she deliberately concealed information that could have prevented the near tragedy. The ethics board finished their investigation. James added quietly, "They're using our case as a teaching example for genetic counselors about the importance of following up on concerning markers, no matter the social consequences." My professional reputation had emerged stronger, my actions protecting both medical ethics and family futures. Margaret's attempts to paint me as a troublemaker had backfired completely. Jessica's starting law school in the fall. I smiled at the acceptance letter on my desk, focusing on adoption rights and medical disclosure laws, making something positive from all this. Michael had found his calling too, working with adoption agencies to improve their genetic screening protocols. The siblings had transformed their pain into purpose, their near tragedy into triumph. "Mother's still not speaking to us," James sighed. "She's living with her sister in Palm Beach, telling everyone we betrayed the family." "She betrayed the family," I corrected gently. "We saved it." The investigation had revealed more of Margaret's secrets, other adopted children she'd hidden from their birth fathers, other families she'd nearly destroyed protecting her carefully crafted image. "The foundation is doing well," James mentioned. "Jessica and Michael are using their wedding fund to help other adoptees access genetic screening, making sure no other siblings find out the truth too late. The Lancaster Family Foundation for Genetic Truth, they'd named it. A legacy of honesty rising from decades of deception. Their birth father wants to contribute." I showed James the email. "Says preventing other families from facing similar situations is the best way to heal from what Margaret did." The man Margaret had hidden Michael from for 30 years was now building relationships with both his children. Another family truth emerging from Margaret's lies. "Sometimes I wonder," James said softly, "how many other secrets she's keeping. How many other lives she's affected with her deceptions. We'll never know all of them." I touched the genetic screening results that had started everything. "But we stopped this one. Prevented this tragedy." Through my office window, I could see Jessica and Michael arriving for their weekly lunch, no longer romantic partners, but family in the truest sense, bound by blood, truth, and survival. "They're happy," James observed. "A different kind of happy than they planned, but real." "Real is better than perfect," I replied, remembering Margaret's obsession with appearances. "Truth is better than lovely lies." The siblings waved up at us, their smiles genuine now, unburdened by unwitting taboo. They'd lost a wedding but gained a family, lost a romance but found themselves. "The Genetic Counseling Conference wants us to present next month." I gathered my files to share how standard screening protocols can reveal critical family information. "Mother would hate that." James smiled slightly, using her perfect scandal as a teaching moment. Perfect scandals make the best lessons. I stood watching Jessica and Michael enter the building, especially when they prevent future tragedies. We headed down to meet them, leaving Margaret's world of beautiful deceptions behind. Sometimes the ugliest truths create the most beautiful futures, if you're brave enough to speak them. "This is a private affair," Victoria Rothschild said, her Hermes scarf perfectly draped despite the June heat. "Members and family only." The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. Members and family. That's exactly how she lured in her victims at the Oakwood Country Club. Exclusive investment opportunities for an exclusive circle. Only the best for Victoria's carefully curated social network. "I'm your son's wife," I reminded her, keeping my voice level. "Of 5 years." "Yes," she sighed, as if my marriage to Andrew were a temporary inconvenience she had to endure. The accountant. Behind her, guests in designer suits and summer dresses filtered into the country club's grand ballroom, where my sister-in-law Charlotte was about to marry the son of a state senator. The perfect merger of money and influence, as Victoria had been bragging for months. The perfect cover for what was about to happen. "Mother," Andrew appeared beside me, looking uncomfortable in his role as groomsman. This is ridiculous. Sarah's my wife. And this is your sister's wedding. Victoria adjusted her pearl necklace. The one I knew she'd bought with Mrs. Henderson's retirement fund. We can't have any disruptions. Disruptions, like questions about where the money went. Like spreadsheets showing how her guaranteed returns were paid with new investors' capital. Like the SEC agents posing as catering staff, waiting for my signal. Mrs. Rothschild, I kept my tone professional. As the club's accounting consultant, I really should discuss some discrepancies. Not today, she cut me off sharply. This is Charlotte's day. Whatever mundane financial matters you've discovered can wait. Mundane. That's how she dismissed my concerns when I first noticed the irregular patterns in the club's investment accounts. Just mundane details, beneath the notice of someone like Victoria Rothschild, whose family had founded this club generations ago. The discrepancies involved the Heritage Investment Fund, I pressed. The one you've been promoting to club members. Victoria's perfectly composed face flickered for just a moment. Andrew, control your wife. She's becoming tedious with these accusations. They're not accusations, Mother. They're numbers. I pulled out my phone, showing the screen. Like the numbers in this transfer from the Hendersons' account, straight to your private bank in the Caymans. How dare you, she started, but I wasn't finished. Or these numbers, I swiped to another screen, showing how you used Mr. Parker's investment to pay Mrs. Davidson's returns. Classic Ponzi structure. Very clean, until it wasn't. Andrew stared at the screen, his face paling. Mother, what is she talking about? Nothing that concerns you, darling. Victoria's voice held the same dismissive tone she used for years to wave away questions about her private investment opportunities. Your wife simply doesn't understand how our circle handles financial matters. Oh, I understand perfectly. I smiled slightly. I understand how you used your social position to target wealthy retirees. How you promised exclusive returns to an exclusive group. How you played on their trust and their greed. Through the ballroom doors, I could see Charlotte in her custom Vera wine, beaming as she prepared to marry into political royalty. She had no idea her perfect day was about to become something very different. Andrew, Victoria's voice hardened, take your wife home. The SEC is already here, I said quietly. They're very interested in how you've been running your little investment club, especially the part where you use your position as club treasurer to access members' financial information. Victoria's perfect mask cracked slightly. You wouldn't dare. Dare to stop you from stealing more retirement funds, from destroying more lives. I met her gaze steadily. Watch me. Mother, Andrew's voice was strained. Is this true? Of course not, she laughed, but it sounded brittle. Your wife has always been jealous of our position. She's trying to ruin Charlotte's wedding with these ridiculous allegations. Allegations backed by bank records. I swiped to another screen. Would you like to explain why Mrs. Henderson's entire retirement fund is now in your personal account? Or why Mr. Parker's investment was used to pay fake returns to 3 other members? Through the doors, the wedding planner was beginning to line up the bridal party. In 15 minutes, the ceremony would begin, unless something stopped it. Consider very carefully. Victoria's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. What accusations like this will do to your marriage, to your place in this family? I have considered it, I replied calmly. I've also considered what will happen when the SEC freezes all your accounts, including the one holding Charlotte's wedding funds. Victoria's perfect composure finally cracked. You wouldn't. Actually, I checked my watch. They probably already have. The first sign that something was wrong came when Victoria's phone buzzed. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled slightly as she read the message. Account access denied, I said before she could speak. That's what it says, isn't it? The SEC moves quickly when they have evidence of a $40 million Ponzi scheme. Andrew was still staring at the financial records on my phone. These are all club members, people we've known our whole lives. People who trusted your mother, I corrected gently. People who believed that Victoria Rothschild would never steer them wrong. After all, she's practically club royalty. Through the ballroom doors, I could see the wedding planner frantically checking her phone, no doubt discovering that the final payment for today's lavish celebration had just been frozen. This is absurd. Victoria's voice shook slightly. I'll simply call Charles at the bank. Charles can't help you, I interrupted. He's already given his statement to the SEC. about how you pressured him to approve transfers without proper documentation, about how you used your position as club treasurer to access members' financial information. The color drained from Victoria's face. Charles wouldn't. He did. Yesterday. I showed her another screen. Right after I showed him proof that you'd been forging his signature on transfer authorizations. The wedding planner was now hurrying toward us, her clipboard clutched tightly. Behind her, I could see two caterers quietly moving into position near the exits. Mrs. Rothschild, the planner's voice was strained. There seems to be an issue with the final payment. The account is showing as frozen. A temporary banking error, Victoria said smoothly, but her hands were shaking as she reached for her phone again. I'll simply transfer the funds from another account. All your accounts are frozen, I said quietly. Personal, business, and offshore. The SEC is very thorough. The planner's eyes widened. Should I tell the vendors to stop setting up? This is ridiculous, Victoria snapped. I am Victoria Rothschild. My family founded this club. Call the bank manager immediately. The bank manager is currently meeting with federal investigators, I interrupted, along with the club president and 3 board members. They're very interested in how you used your positions of trust to target wealthy retirees. Andrew's face had gone from pale to ashen. The Hendersons. They lost everything. Everyone lost everything, I confirmed softly, except your mother. She has quite a nice nest egg in the Caymans. Or had, until about 10 minutes ago. The wedding planner was still hovering anxiously. Mrs. Rothschild, the florist is demanding payment confirmation before completing the setup. Then confirm it. Victoria's perfect composure cracked completely. Use the Heritage Fund account. The one you emptied last week? I asked. Or the one you used to pay fake returns to early investors? Through the doors, I could see Charlotte approaching, her wedding gown a cloud of designer perfection. She had no idea her perfect day was about to implode. Mother, Charlotte called out. Why aren't the flowers finished, and why is the caterer packing up? Victoria's face went from white to gray. Darling, there's just a small banking issue. There's a federal investigation, I corrected, into how your mother stole $40 million from club members through her exclusive investment scheme. Charlotte stopped dead, her designer shoes squeaking on the marble floor. What? Your wife is lying, Victoria said quickly. Andrew, tell your sister. The SEC has the proof, I cut in. Bank records, transfer documents, forged signatures. Would you like to see Mrs. Henderson's account statements? The ones showing how your mother emptied her retirement fund last month. Charlotte's perfect bridal makeup couldn't hide her growing horror. The Hendersons? Mom, they're like family. Which made them perfect targets, I finished, along with every other wealthy club member who trusted the Rothschild name. The caterers were moving closer now, their server uniforms hiding federal badges. In moments, Victoria's carefully constructed world would shatter completely. I can explain everything. Victoria's voice had a desperate edge. It's just a temporary cash flow issue. Ponzi schemes usually are, I agreed, until they collapse, like yours just did. Charlotte was staring at her mother, really seeing her perhaps for the first time. Mom, what did you do? Nothing that concerns you, darling. Victoria tried to smooth her already perfect hair. Your wedding will proceed exactly as planned. No, I said quietly, it won't. The federal agents were already moving forward, their badges appearing as they approached. Victoria's perfect world was about to end, right here in the club her family had founded. Sometimes karma comes with handcuffs. 1 year later, I sat in my office at the restructured Oakwood Country Club, reviewing the final restitution payments. The club had survived, barely, after selling most of its assets to repay Victoria's victims. The Hendersons got their house back, Andrew said from the doorway, bringing coffee. The SEC recovered enough from Mother's Cayman accounts to make them whole. Not everyone had been so lucky. Some of Victoria's earlier victims would never see their full investments returned. But at least justice had been served. Charlotte's doing well, I said, touching the wedding photo on my desk, not from her planned society wedding, but from the small ceremony she had 6 months later. The foundation she started is helping other Ponzi scheme victims. The Rothschild Victim Recovery Foundation, she'd named it, turning her family's shame into something positive, using her social connections to help rather than harm. Mother's sentencing is next week, Andrew sighed. 15 years minimum, the prosecutor says, plus restitution payments for the rest of her life. Victoria's perfect world had crumbled spectacularly. The society maven was now wearing prison badge instead of designer labels, her carefully curated image destroyed by her own greed. The club membership is actually up, I said, showing him the latest numbers. People appreciate the new transparency requirements and the mandatory financial audits. After the scandal, the club had rebuilt itself on a foundation of accountability rather than exclusivity. Victoria would have hated it, which made it even more satisfying. Senator Brighton's wife called. Andrew managed a small smile. She wants to host a fundraiser for Charlotte's foundation. Said preventing financial fraud is the new social cause. Ironic, considering how Victoria had once courted the senator's family for Charlotte's wedding. Now his wife was supporting efforts to prevent schemes like Victoria's. The SEC is using our case as a training example, I said, pulling up the presentation I'd helped develop. How social status can be used to perpetrate financial fraud. How exclusive clubs can become hunting grounds. Victoria's scheme had become a cautionary tale in financial circles. Her method of using social standing to target wealthy retirees was now a textbook example of affinity fraud. Sometimes I wonder, Andrew said quietly, how many other Victorias are out there? How many other exclusive clubs are being used to hide fraud? That's why we created the whistleblower program, I said, gesturing to the hotline poster on my wall. Anonymous reporting for suspicious investment schemes. Already caught 2 similar operations at other clubs. The Rothschild case had sparked a movement in the country club world. Members were more vigilant now, less willing to trust based solely on social standing. Charlotte visited mother in prison, Andrew mentioned, said she still doesn't understand why she did it, why she stole from people who trusted her. Greed rarely makes sense, I replied, remembering Victoria's desperate face that day at the wedding, especially when it's wrapped in designer labels and social status. Through my office window, I could see Mrs. Henderson playing tennis, her retirement secure again thanks to the SEC's recovery efforts. She waved, no longer the broken woman who discovered her life savings gone. The new club board meets tomorrow, I said, gathering my files. We're voting on making financial transparency a permanent requirement for membership. Mother would hate that, Andrew smiled slightly. Almost as much as she hates prison jumpsuits. Perfect karma, I said, watching members enjoy their club, now secure in its reformed identity. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting justice work. Victoria had tried to keep me out that day, believing her social status would protect her. Instead, she triggered her own downfall, brought down by the common accountant she looked down on. Sometimes the best accounting isn't about numbers at all. It's about balancing the books of justice. It's really quite simple, dear. Margaret adjusted her new Cartier watch. A wedding gift from husband number 3. The children need a proper maternal figure, and your family now. I stared at her across the mahogany conference table in my office, wondering if she realized the irony of having this conversation in the headquarters of the tech company I'd built from scratch. I am family, I agreed, glancing at the quarterly reports on my tablet. I'm also the CEO of a $2 billion company. Yes, your little startup, she waved dismissively. But Richard's children need stability, structure, a mother's touch. Richard, the telecommunications mogul she'd married 3 months ago, came with 4 kids from his previous marriage. The same Richard whose company was hemorrhaging market share to innovative competitors like mine. They have a mother, I reminded her, and 2 nannies, from what I understand. Their mother is in Europe with that tennis instructor. Margaret's lip curled in disapproval. And hired help can never replace family. You're their stepsister-in-law now. You have responsibilities. Through my office windows, I could see my development team working on our latest software release, the one that would probably finish destroying Richard's outdated business model. My responsibility is to my company, I said carefully, and to our shareholders. Family comes first, Margaret insisted. Richard agrees completely. He says it's wonderful that you're willing to step in. I raised an eyebrow. I haven't agreed to anything. Don't be difficult, dear. The children need you. Richard's daughter Sophia is struggling in school. The twins need someone to coordinate their activities, and little James is having trouble adjusting to the divorce. My phone buzzed with an alert, another drop in Richard's company stock price. Soon, very soon. I sympathize, I said, not entirely lying. But I can't abandon my company. Abandon? Margaret laughed her society laugh. Dear, you've made your point with this career thing. You've proven you can play with the big boys. Now it's time to focus on what really matters. The casual dismissal of everything I'd built made my teeth clench. 10 years of 80-hour weeks, fighting through tech bros condescension, building something revolutionary, reduced to playing with the big boys. What matters, I said evenly, is that I have 500 employees depending on me, and shareholders who've trusted me with their investments. Richard could find a position for some of them, Margaret offered magnanimously, once you've settled in with the children, of course. My laptop pinged, another acquisition target analysis from my team. Richard's company's vulnerabilities highlighted in neat red bullets. The children have 2 parents, I reminded her, and professional caregivers. But they need family. Margaret leaned forward, her designer perfume nearly overwhelming. Richard's been so generous, bringing us all together. The least you could do is help with his children. Through the glass walls, I saw my CFO giving me the signal. Our latest stock purchase had gone through, one step closer. I help by being successful, I said carefully, by being someone those kids can look up to. They need someone to look at, not up to, Margaret countered. Someone there every day, not playing businesswoman in an office. My phone buzzed again. Richard's company stock was down another 3%. The market was noticing our quiet purchases. I built this company from nothing, I said quietly. While you were going through husbands 2 and 3, I was creating something lasting. And now you can create something more important, she smiled condescendingly. A real family legacy. The irony almost made me laugh, if she only knew what was coming. Speaking of legacy, I glanced at my calendar. How is Richard's company doing? I heard there were some challenges. Minor setbacks, Margaret waved away millions in losses. Richard always lands on his feet. He has connections. Connections wouldn't save him from what was coming. Innovation, adaptability, and strategic planning would win. Everything his company had failed at. I'm sure he does, I smiled slightly, but I still can't abandon my company. You're being selfish. Margaret stood, smoothing her designer dress. Those children need you. Richard needs you. Family needs you. My phone lit up with another message. Our ownership stake had just crossed 15%. Soon we'd have to file public disclosure. You're right about one thing, I said softly. Family is important. So is taking care of people who depend on you. Then you'll do it. Margaret's face lit up. You'll help with the children. No, I checked the stock ticker again. But I will be seeing a lot more of Richard soon, professionally speaking. What does that mean? Her eyes narrowed slightly. It means, I stood, ending the meeting, that sometimes the best way to help family is to stay exactly where you are. In 6 weeks, I'd be Richard's boss. But Margaret didn't need to know that. Yet. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting business take its course. 6 weeks later, I sat in the same conference room, watching Margaret's face as the reality of the situation finally sank in. This is impossible, she clutched her designer handbag like a shield. Richard would never sell to your daughter-in-law who should be home with the children. I finished mildly, sliding the acquisition paperwork across the table. The market disagrees. Richard sat beside her, his corporate swagger replaced by defeated resignation. The numbers didn't lie. His company had been bleeding market share for years while mine had been innovating. It's a hostile takeover. Margaret turned to Richard desperately. You can fight this. With what capital? I asked quietly, pulling up the financial projections. Your key 3 losses were catastrophic. The board has already approved the sale. Through my office windows, I could see the CNBC headlines running. Tech's newest giant. Rising star acquires legacy player. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing with congratulations all morning. But the children, Margaret sputtered. They need stability. Structure. They'll have it, I assured her, pulling out another document. Along with fully funded college accounts, guaranteed internships if they want them, and a trust that activates when they turn 25. Richard's head snapped up. This wasn't in the official acquisition terms. I take care of family, I said simply. Just not by abandoning my responsibilities. This is manipulation, Margaret's voice shook. Using business to force your way into what? I interrupted. Into the family you insisted I prioritize? I'm doing exactly what you asked, putting family first. My CFO appeared at the door with more paperwork. The markets were responding enthusiastically to the acquisition announcement. Our stock was up 12% already. The integration team is ready, I told Richard directly. We'll retain 60% of your workforce with generous packages for the rest. Your core technology will be upgraded, not scrapped. And my position? He asked quietly. Senior Advisory Board. I slid over another contract. Your experience has value even if your business model didn't. Plus, you'll have more time for those family obligations Margaret keeps mentioning. Margaret's perfectly manicured hands trembled as she reached for the papers. This isn't what I meant about family. No, I agreed. You meant I should give up everything I've built to babysit. Instead, I built something bigger, strong enough to protect everyone, including the children you claim to care so much about. Through the glass walls, I could see my team preparing for the transition. Months of careful planning were finally paying off. The children's trust, Richard said slowly, reading the documents. This is generous. Family takes care of family. I echoed Margaret's words back to her. Just not by sacrificing success. My phone buzzed with another alert. Our stock was still climbing. The market loved a well-executed acquisition. You've been planning this, Margaret accused. All those times you refused to help with the children. I was helping, I corrected, by building something lasting, something that will secure their future better than any amount of babysitting could. Richard was still reading the integration plans, his business acumen finally engaging. These technology upgrades, they could actually work. Of course they'll work. I pulled up our development roadmap. We've been innovating while you were coasting on past success. Now we'll do it together. Margaret's face shifted from shock to calculation. Classic Margaret, always looking for an angle. Well, she attempted a smile. I suppose this makes us even more family than before. It makes us business partners, I corrected. Family was your choice when you married Richard. Business is mine. My assistant appeared with champagne, not to celebrate the acquisition, but to mark the moment Margaret finally understood who really held the power. The press conference is in an hour, I informed them. Richard, you'll need to project confidence about the merger. Margaret, you're welcome to attend, but... Of course I'll attend, she interrupted, already adjusting her designer outfit. I'm family, after all. Yes, I smiled slightly, remembering all her condescending comments about my little startup. You certainly are. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply succeeding so thoroughly that nothing else matters. 1 year later, I sat reviewing the quarterly reports in my expanded office, a photo of Richard's kids on my desk. Not as charges I was watching, but as participants in our company's new STEM education program. Sophia's code won the junior hackathon, my assistant mentioned, bringing coffee. The twins' robotics team is heading to nationals. The children had thrived once they were given opportunities instead of obligations. Even little James was showing interest in our junior engineering workshops. Margaret still not speaking to me, I smiled at the thought. Even though the acquisition tripled her family's net worth, the merger had been more successful than anyone predicted. Richard's experience combined with our innovation had created something remarkable. Even the market analysts were impressed. The Children's Trust Fund statements went out, my CFO added from the doorway. Margaret tried to access them again. Of course she did. I sighed, remembering her attempts to control the money I'd set aside for the kids' future. She still doesn't understand she has no authority over those accounts. Through my office windows, I could see Sophia in the junior developer lab, learning to code with our top engineers, so much for Margaret's insistence that she needed constant maternal supervision. Richard's doing well with the advisory board, my assistant noted. His experience is actually valuable when he's not fighting to save a dying company. He'd found his footing in the new structure, offering insights without trying to control everything. Unlike Margaret, who was still trying to manipulate situations to her advantage. The family therapy sessions are helping, I touched the latest report. The kids are processing the divorce better now that they have stability and purpose. Not the kind of stability Margaret had demanded, the enforced domesticity of a full-time caregiver, but the security of knowing their future was protected and their potential valued. The new family leave policy is getting attention, my CFO mentioned. Other companies are following our lead. We'd implemented comprehensive support for all types of families, not just the traditional structure Margaret had tried to force. Working parents, blended families, single parents all had resources and flexibility. Margaret called again about the Christmas gala. My assistant sighed. She wants to help plan the corporate event. Still trying to control something, I smiled slightly. Tell her the professional event planners have it handled. The annual gala would showcase our company's achievements, including the children's STEM projects. Not quite the society event Margaret had envisioned, but far more meaningful. The kids want to spend their school break in the innovation lab, my assistant added, rather than the country club activities Margaret planned. They'd found their own paths, far from their grandmother's social engineering. Safia was already talking about computer science programs for college. Sometimes the best care isn't caregiving, I observed, watching the junior developers at work. It's creating opportunities. Margaret had wanted me to give up everything to focus on family. Instead, I built something that benefited everyone, including the children she claimed to care about so much. The new headquarters opens next month, my CFO reminded me. The Children's Education Center will be named after the kids. A lasting legacy, not of forced domestic obligations, but of opportunity and growth. Something Margaret would never quite understand. Family first, I murmured, echoing Margaret's words with new meaning. Just not the way she planned. Through the glass walls, I could see the future we'd built, not through sacrifice and submission, but through innovation and empowerment. The children were thriving, the company was soaring, and Margaret was learning that sometimes the best way to help family is to ignore those who claim to speak for it. Success, after all, is the sweetest revenge,